Shock is an acute medical condition due to a fall in blood pressure in your vital organs. It is a very serious situation because if your blood pressure drops low enough, blood won't be getting through to your vital organs, meaning they begin to die off, which can lead to death eventually if it's not treated. There are lots of different types of shock. You can have cardiac shock, which is where you have heart failure, which means your heart isn't pumping properly and you get a drop of blood pressure as a result. Alternatively, you might have septic shock. This is where you can have an infection in your system, which causes your blood pressure to drop as a result. The type of shock we tend to focus on a first aid course like this is called hypovolemic shock, or the lay term for it is blood loss shock. And as that name suggests, whenever you have a major bleed, you're losing lots and lots of blood, which means your blood pressure might drop as a result. Alternatively, it can happen when you're losing excessive amounts of bodily fluids through excessive vomiting or diarrhea. So the key takeaway is shock is an acute medical condition due to a fall in blood pressure, and I want you to always think if you ever see someone who's having a major bleed or losing lots of bodily fluids, I want you to automatically think they might be going into a state of shock. Now, alongside seeing that major bleed, there's also a couple of key signs and symptoms that you can look for. First of all, you might get pale grey coloured skin. This makes sense because if your blood pressure is dropping, you're not going to have nice warm sort of red rosy coloured skin because all of the blood is going to be pulled from your extremities to the core of your body where your vital organs are. So you're going to have pale grey coloured skin, and that skin will be cold and clammy to touch. Alongside that, you might have a feeling of sickness or thirst. Once again, this makes sense because if you're losing lots of bodily fluids, it makes sense that you might become quite thirsty. As your body starts to respond to this situation, you'll find that your heart starts to pump quicker, which means as a result, you'll get a rapid weak pulse and rapid shallow breathing. You might also get some gasping of air and restlessness in there as well. In terms of the treatment for shock, the first thing you should do is if you know what the cause of the shock is deal with that cause straight away. So for example, if you know the person's going into shock because they've got a major bleed, then deal with the bleeding, stem the blood flow as quickly as possible. The next thing you want to do is you want to lie the casualty down and raise their legs, as you can see in this picture on the screen. You could put their legs on a box or a chair, or you could just hold them at roughly knee height. What this is going to do is it's going to force all of the blood that's in your major muscle groups in your legs down into the core of your body, in the center of your chest and head, and hopefully raise the blood pressure slightly in those regions, helping to relieve some of the signs and symptoms. Now, we said the person's likely to have cold, clammy skin, so we recommend you try and keep them warm. So you might put a blanket or a jumper over the top of them to try and keep them warm. Now, this is an interesting one. We don't recommend you let the person eat or drink anything. Now, normally in first aid, we'd say give the person sips of water. It's a good thing to do. It calms them down, regulates the breathing. Shock's one of the only situations where we don't recommend you give them anything to eat or drink, and that's because this person is going to need to go to hospital, and when they get to hospital, they're going to have to inject their body with a range of drugs to try and raise their blood pressure back up. And if you've given the person something to eat or drink, it can affect those drugs later on. So don't give them anything to eat or drink. And then finally, shock is a medical emergency. It can kill if it's not treated, and therefore you should call 999, 112, 911 as soon as possible to get an ambulance and get that professional help as soon as possible.